Hi everyone, my name is Abby Adam. I am a student fellow at Gettysburg College Civil War Institute. Today I will be interviewing Civil War historian Dr. Bradley Gottfried. Thank you for joining me today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you, Abigail.
So, from what I understand, you were quite the prolific historian on Civil War maps. You've authored maps of Antietam, maps of Bristow Station / Mine Run, maps of First Bull Run, maps of Gettysburg, and maps of the Wilderness Campaign. So what drew you to studying maps of the Civil War?
It's a very good question. I think back, when people ask me why I do map books, and let me just step back and explain for those people who aren't familiar with what I do. I don't consider myself to be a cartographer. There are some really great ones. I'm just a functional map maker. And if you look at my book, my map books, they're called atlases. On the left side is the text, on the right side is the map, and you can flip through, and actually it tells the story of the entire campaign from the very beginning of the campaign to the very end. And so people will use it, one, to learn about the maps, about the campaign, but also what I find that's interesting, and you may get into this a little bit, Abigail, that some people will use my map books to illustrate other books that they're reading on that particular campaign, because, and to get to the answer to your question, there's never enough maps in a book. And I remember people will ask, well, why do you do this? Because it takes so much time. I do the text, I do the maps, and it takes basically double the time to write a book, as you can imagine. And I always tell them I do it for the 13-year-old person that I was, the boy that I was, because I would read about all of these campaigns and I would really struggle to try to understand what was really happening. And so my feeling is, and people have told me this frequently, that they finally can understand a campaign, because there it is. They can see the troop movements, they can see the topography, they can see the terrain features, and it makes sense for them. And so that has become my calling, although and I'm going on and on, I apologize, but I didn't start off this way. I started off actually writing regular Civil War books, and we can talk about that transition in a little bit. Or if you'd like, I can go into that right now, why I transitioned to map books.
Yeah, go right ahead.
Okay, great. So I had written, I started off with a revised edition of Stackpole and Nye's Battle of Gettysburg, a guided tour that came out during the centennial. And that led me to a history of the Philadelphia Brigade. And then that led me to a number of books on Gettysburg, not map books, artillery of Gettysburg, the roads to Gettysburg, the brigades of Gettysburg. And as I was really getting into Gettysburg, I realized there really wasn't enough maps, and I could do it. In other words, I came up with this concept of about 150 maps, description on the facing page, and I sort of fell into it. And so that's what I then transitioned to. My goal is to write or prepare a campaign book for every campaign in the Eastern Theater of the Civil War. I'm now collaborating with another historian, and I'm just doing his maps, and he's doing the text, and we're co-authors on this. But I should also mention that I'm not just a map guy. And so, for instance, my wife and I, a couple of years ago, published a Point Lookout prisoner of war camp book, because we lived in Southern Maryland. It was right down the road. I'm finishing a book now on Lee's 2 invasions of the North. And so while I primarily do map books, I'm working on Petersburg through Appomattox. I finished Spotsylvania through Cold Harbor. I'm working also on Second Manassas. I also will do typical history books, Civil War books. So I'm not just concentrated in one area or another. That was a long answer, and I apologize.
No need to apologize. That was a great answer. So it sounds like there's a lot of considerable overlap with all of your different projects going on, because of how, yeah, like you said earlier, maps are so important to understanding a battle and explaining how each movement happened.
Oh, yes. And, with this pandemic, I don't know if we can say anything good about the pandemic, but for me, because I was stuck in the house, it allowed me to work on additional projects that I would probably not have. And I multitask. In fact, my wife would tell you that I have attention deficit disorder, but I can't do one project at a time. So I'm working on a map book. We're working collaboratively with the Brigades of Antietam book. So I have several projects that are all going on at the same time.
So do your works tend to build off one another since you're working on them at the same time? Or do you keep them mostly separate?
Oh, no. Like, for instance, I'm editing the Brigades of Antietam book. In fact, right before this, the Ninth Corps. And then I'll stop, take a break, and then I'll jump over to the Lee's invasion of the North America, how the armies moved through Maryland during the Antietam campaign. And then my collaborator, Sean Chick, who's working with me on Shiloh, just said, hey, we need to revise this map. So I'll jump over to that. So it's crazy, but I tend to, rather than saying, okay, today I'm just going to work on this project, I do all of them, jumping from one to the other, and that's just the way I work. It seems to work for me.
There you go. Sounds very busy and very exciting, definitely. So I have oh, sorry, were you going to say something?
Nope.
Oh, okay. So I just had another question about your research and the Civil War maps. So what kind of research goes into the scholarly mapping books and those sort of projects that you produce?
I love whether I'm doing a map book, whether I'm doing I don't want to say a regular Civil War book, but I love to integrate first-person accounts. Obviously the OR, official records, is the Bible, but there are so many other first-person accounts, the soldiers' accounts. It's interesting. I've been thinning out my library. I'm 71 years old, and I don't want to be morbid, but I don't want my kids to be stuck with trying to dispose of all of these books. I had probably about 1,800 at one time. So now what I'm doing is keeping only certain books, regimental histories, memoirs, diaries, campaigns. I've really limited it. And so I'll spend a lot of time, thank goodness for archive.org. And it's amazing how many people really don't know that it exists. But when I first did my Brigades of Gettysburg book, and that highlights each brigade and what it did at the battle, it's a giant, it's about 700 pages. I would go to Carlisle, the War College, and we're talking about the 80s, 1980s or so, maybe early 1990s. And I'd go with a copier, a portable copier, and I would simply copy the pages on Gettysburg for all of these regimental histories, the diaries, the letters, et cetera, memoirs. And now you just go on archive.com and you download them, and there they are. It's perfect. The War College, as you know, and so many other repositories are very important as well in terms of first-person accounts. I think sometimes you can get a little, well, for me, overkill, because I'm not writing a book on Fredericksburg that's about 600 pages. I'm writing a book on Fredericksburg that might be 325 pages, and it doesn't go into the kind of depth that a typical campaign would go into. So that makes it a little bit easier, but I want people to smell the battle and hear the battle and feel the battle. And I don't want to simply describe it. I want the soldiers to describe it as well. So it does get into as much research as I possibly can. And that's what I think is so great. I'm a biologist by training. I should say that's my doctorate. And as a biologist, as a scientist, and not to say historians don't do the same thing, but, we think a certain way and we tease out information a certain way. And that has really helped me to discern what was really happening. And I don't know if you want to go into this, but if you ask me what the biggest problem I have when I give a presentation or when someone wants to give a review on my books, it's no, that unit was not right there. It was half an inch over to the left. And I never complain, I never criticize, I never debate, because the reality is we don't really know. You know, it's people have given their accounts and, you know, it's their best guess. And what I found is, and it's interesting, Gettysburg, you know about John Botchelder, and, you know, wonderful, wonderful resources, you know, 3 volumes filled with all kinds of letters, you know, to John. The reality, what I find is the further you get away from a battle, the less likely those memories are going to be accurate. And you have people saying, well, but so-and-so said this. And I'll say, but wait a minute, what year did he say that? What year did he, 1901? So you're talking 40 years later? My wife and I are writing a book. In fact, it should be out this year. It's on the formation of the Gettysburg National Cemetery and the consecration ceremony. And it is amazing the number of first-person accounts that were written. And if you were to count all those up, it probably would have meant at least 1 million people were in Gettysburg, not that 15,000. Probably every one of them shook Lincoln's hand. And if you look at the dates, they're talking about 1910. They're talking about 1890, when they've read other things. And I believe that they understand. They do believe that they did shake his hand. They do believe that this happened. But oftentimes memory is faulty, and you read things and your memory will shift. And for me, one of the biggest issues, and why I like to use first-person accounts, is I'll start comparing. You know, I've got the regimental history, I've got some letters and diaries, and can I see which one, because they're all going to conflict oftentimes, which ones seem to be most congruent with what seems to be true. And I tend to spend more time on letters, diaries, than I do memoirs that were published years ago. And, you know, also they're trying to justify some of their actions. You know, you have like he wasn't at Gettysburg, but you have Abner Cox, Jacob Cox, excuse me, who commanded the Ninth Corps at Antietam. And, you know, he wrote voluminous writings, but oftentimes it was, well, he's trying to, I won't say twist, but make his actions fit, you know, what happened rather than what really might have happened, if you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, kind of changing the narrative, I guess, to better suit historical opinion, would you say? Yeah.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
Definitely. And, you know, there's so many rationales, there's so many motivations. But, you know, and I think about it, I have tried to write a diary my entire life. I can't do it. I'm not disciplined. So I value those people who actually do record, even if it's a sentence or two, every day. And you do get a sense of, you know, what it was really like that particular time. I get a kick out of those people who write in 1890, and it was like it was yesterday, you know, and I'm saying, unless they took notes at the time, there is no way that they could have that precision in terms of memory. But I tend to be a little cynical in that regard.
Mm-hmm. So I know it's probably a very tricky question to answer, but do you think you could pick like a most memorable source, or maybe a favorite source that you've come across over your years of studying?
Well, beyond the official records, which is obviously the best because it was soon after each campaign, each battle for the most part. Now, this was written a little bit later, but Rufus Dawes from the 6th Wisconsin, you can smell the smoke. You can see the battle. And even though it's later, I quote him all the time because he has memorable quotes. and you really can identify with what was happening. So that probably is my go-to source. If I had to pick one that I really wanted to use and felt that it really portrayed what happened, I would go to that one. Although again, it's a little bit later. He wrote it. I don't remember exactly when he wrote it, although I think there's some letters in there that were period letters. But that's one that I do appreciate, yes.
My goodness, it sounds amazing, especially how immersive it is. It sounds like you can really get into the story there.
Yes, if you ever have an opportunity, read the section on Gettysburg, where he talks about the charge against the sunken road in Davis's brigade. Amazing, just amazing. Yeah, you're there. You feel like you're there.
It's amazing. So out of all the books you've written, which do you think was the most intriguing to research and why?
Ooh.
Tricky question, I know.
It's a tough question because, quite frankly, it's like having 14 kids and saying which one. Every one I've learned from. Every one has been an experience for me. The one that I look back on and I say, whoa, I can't believe I did this, is the Brigades of Gettysburg. When you have a 700-page book, when you have 100 brigades and spending, time, maybe 3,000, 4,000 words on each brigade, I marvel that I was able to stick with it. And the way I was able to do it is I never said, okay, I'm done one, I have 96 more to do, because that would be overwhelming. It would be, I've done one, what's next? What's next? And then I looked up one day and I was finished. I learned so much about Gettysburg, about each unit in writing that book. But I could say the same thing about any of the map books. I don't think one map book is more interesting or better than another. But I have to tell you, every time I'm working on a map book, I'm learning so much. Like I'm working on the second Bull Run campaign. I didn't know much or anything about Cedar Mountain. And holy cow, it's a little battle, but it was amazing in terms of how one brigade, Crawford's brigade, almost rolled up Jackson's entire wing practically. And I'm saying, wow, this is great. So I do a lot of wow, because so it's for me, it's I'm learning and then I'm sharing, and for me, you don't make much money. I think on writing books, I think I might earn maybe 5 cents an hour in writing it. But I want to share what I've learned with others. And really, for me, it's an exploration. I'm not an expert on anything, quite frankly. So I'm learning, and I'm hoping people will learn as a result of what I've learned.
That's a great answer. Thank you. Mm-hmm. So is there anything I haven't really touched upon or anything that you'd like to add?
Oh, boy. No, I think we've covered a lot. The only thing I've mentioned is I think it was a colonel in Davis's brigade. Mm. And, Mississippi, North Carolina troops. And I think he was a North Carolinian, and he was a colonel, and I can't remember his name, but it could have been Stone. In his memoirs, he was very clear. He said, I've been in many battles, and for virtually all of those battles, I saw no further than maybe 10 yards on any side of him because of all of the smoke and all of the confusion and all of the, just the noise. And so when you have people writing as though it was a clear battlefield and they could see everything, when those cannons start firing and when those muskets start going off and you have all that white smoke, you don't see a whole lot. And that has always stuck with me, that, you depend on eyewitness accounts, first-person accounts, but we have to be very careful in really using those accounts. And we have to use our own critical thinking to determine, Is it valid? Is it something that we should put some validity to? Or should we just say, nah, we're not going to use this one? It sounds too good. I mean, there's some that are really great quotes. And I said to myself, but there's no way he could have seen this. There's no way he was there. There's no way. I just have to put it aside because I just don't want to include quotes or observations that I know are dubious.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. So kind of reading at face value versus interpreting primary sources.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think that's critical, that anyone who reads history or writes history really needs to have that fine eye. And I think the first thing that I always do is I look at the date. You know, was this a letter written right after the battle? Was it a letter that was written 40 years, after? And I think that is the first thing that I look at. And then I compare it with others who were in the same unit in the same area. And how do they dovetail? You know, are they similar? Are they complete? And so often they're completely different. And I understand again why they're different, because they may be seeing different things. They're exposed to, even if the same regiment, they may be exposed to different experiences. So it's difficult, but I find it fascinating. And that's why I like it so much.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. It was a wonderful conversation. It was great to meet you.
Yes, definitely. Thank you, Abigail. I appreciate the opportunity.
Yes, of course. Thank you.
Welcome.